Hello, welcome to our second episode of On Your Mind.
A podcast looking at various mental health issues through a uniquely Singaporean context. This podcast is a result of the collaboration between MOHT's Let's Talk and Intellect, where we will discuss various topics that are on your mind. I'm Paul, a counselor from MOHT on the Let's Talk team, an online anonymous forum that encourages youth to share any issues, thoughts, or feelings related to mental health in a safe space.
And I'm Yee Ning, also a counselor from Intellect, and we are a modern day mental health company that provides a new approach to end-to-end mental health care.
Please note that while we aim to provide insight and support, this podcast is a reflection of our own perspectives and not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Given that some of the topics discussed could be sensitive or distressing, we would encourage you to reach out to a mental health professional or other support should the need arise.
So I've heard from so many of you about the challenges of getting through to your parents, and that's why today's episode is all about tackling these questions head on, diving into ways to make family convos less heated or awkward and hopefully a little bit more open.
Right. One of the most common problems that we've got with youth telling us is that their parents don't understand them or their choices. For example, I've encountered clients who have chosen a particular academic direction for their university studies that their parents simply don't agree with, and that's caused a lot of friction between them and their parents. Yee Ning, I'm wondering, did you feel the same way when you were younger?
Oh yeah, of course. Funnily enough, well, or maybe not so funny, me becoming a counselor was something that my parents had a lot of doubts around initially. They weren't quite familiar with the field of mental health or what psychology sort of looked like or what counseling was about. And so when I first brought it up to them that that was something I was interested in, there was a lot of debate and a lot of heated discussions, and I think it left me feeling quite unheard and unsupported. I also understood like where they were coming from. You know, their fears very valid. It's something that was quite foreign to them, and they as my parents probably had concerns about my future. So yeah, it was an interesting situation. Um, but ultimately, after a lot of discussions and me just really standing by what I wanted to do, I guess I was able to convince them, and that's why I'm here today.
Thank you for sharing, Yee Ning. And I'm hearing also that, you really were very generous in trying to extend that empathy towards them and try and think things through from their point of view, right? But I think, yeah, we both know that that can be a lot easier said than done.
Exactly. And it can also be really frustrating at times if I guess, you know, someone's parents are not receptive to this idea. So, which brings me to our audience's next question about how can we regulate ourselves, especially when we're triggered during some of these conversations, which might get more heated.
And especially when you're in the heat of that sort of conversation, right? It can be really difficult to create that sort of emotional and physical distance that you might need during that point of time that might be necessary or might be helpful towards helping you process or think through what they're feeling. So yeah, I think in moments like those, do whatever you need to just get through that period of time. However, after that confrontation has passed, something that I find useful is to grow my self-awareness through reflection on why I was feeling that way. For example, am I feeling this way because this is a pattern of relation between myself and my parents that we've just fallen in through over many, many years? Or am I feeling this way because my boundaries and my values are being violated or disregarded? And having that clarity and having that understanding of which is which and why I'm reacting the way that I'm reacting has been really helpful for me.
Yeah, and like thanks for sharing, Paul. And I think that self-reflection, especially after conflict, to really get a sense of one's internal world can be very helpful in, I guess, responding to conflict in the future as well. And I think it's also probably important to acknowledge that everybody has very different coping strategies. In the heat of the moment, when everybody's, you know, let's say very tense, how they respond, how they look after themselves will probably look quite different. You know, and you spoke a little bit about how, you know, getting yourself away from the situation at that point in time. So I guess that's where boundary setting could possibly come in as a potential strategy. You know, understanding what it is that you need to do to keep yourself feeling safe and regulated at that point in time. And if it means, you know, taking time out to step away for a couple minutes before coming back to the conversation so that things are a little bit less heated might actually be helpful. Like what you were saying, Paul, I think being able to empathize with our parents and understanding like their values and perspectives and how, why is it they respond the way that they do can also be quite helpful in us adapting and adjusting our behavior so that we can better mitigate conflict in the future. Potential other strategies that might be helpful would be to maybe engage in conversation about shared values. Because sometimes I find that conflict happens when there is a stark difference or misinterpretation as to, what the other person really wants. And having that open conversation to, I guess, hear each other's perspective can sometimes be a bit of a gap, like a bit of a bridge to tide things over.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's really great that we are exploring all of these different strategies and different ways of bridging those gaps, right? But yeah, I've also heard from clients before that it's definitely not an easy process and it's definitely a really tiring process, right? Especially when you always feel like you're the one taking out that emotional energy and putting in that time to sort of bridge that relationship. And yeah, sometimes for clients, it can reach a breaking point where they're like, you know what, this is too much for me. I can't always be the one doing this, and I need to either take a step back or really reevaluate what is the direction that I want my relationship with my family to be in. So yeah, I think that can be really difficult to sort of be very clear about your own boundaries and confront the possibility, that you might not have the kind of very normative relationship that one is expecting from a family dynamic. Especially in our Asian society that we live in, filial piety is a really big deal. Growing up with family so closely embedded to you in all of its good and bad ways does create a reliance on them throughout a large part of your development. So yeah, I think really exploring what feasible options there are for you within your context, specific to your situation, probably with a mental health professional, might be the most expedient, might be the most helpful way for you to be able to sort these feelings out.
Absolutely. I think you've made some really good points, Paul. And I guess, it's coming back to it's the idea of like being really clear about what your own personal values are. Like the values of filial piety. I think growing up in that Asian collective culture that you spoke about is something that's quite strong. But at the same time, I think what I find quite helpful when I talk with clients is to understand, what are some of the values from my family of origin? What are some of the values that mom bring into the relationship? What are some of the values that dad bring into the relationship? And what are some of the values that I want to choose for myself? Because I think that's like the beautiful thing. You get to pick and choose the values and beliefs that you want to live by. After much, I guess, like reflection and introspection, if we ourselves are a little bit clearer on some of our own personal values, it can maybe allow us to have a bit more of an objective and non-reactive stance when interacting with our family members that we might disagree with, because this way it's no longer about them being an unempathetic person, an unsupportive person. It's just merely a difference in values, and that can sometimes also help to reframe the conflict. I guess a stronger sense of what our own personal values are, when we might be able to shift the focus to really understand, why are some of the reasons we disagree with somebody else? Just like channeling that energy into things that really do matter to us, like get back again to that idea of what is it that I really value, and focusing on that and what is important rather than what we cannot change.
Absolutely. And I think also so much value as well in paying attention to your feelings, right? And yeah, as you've mentioned, really thinking through what are my values? Why am I feeling this way? Is it appropriate? How am I feeling in relation to my parents? All of those things are super, super important. And it's a very, very long process as well, right? Like these dynamics are built up over years and years and years. And yeah, they definitely don't change overnight. So reaching out to like-minded friends, your siblings, or even a counselor if you're struggling can often be a lot of support as you journey through this process.
And I think, while we're talking about all of this, being understanding of our own response and our own reaction and understanding where our parents can come from as well, I think it's also quite important to acknowledge that sometimes, you know, for whatever reasons, I guess like parents might engage in slightly more verbally abusive or emotionally abusive and hurtful behaviors. And there's a difference between accepting those behaviors and understanding where they're coming from. And I guess if you find yourself, to all the listeners out there, if you find yourself struggling with balancing some of these two, right? So what behaviors are actually appropriate for you to sit with? Again, reaching out and seeking professional help would be a good start.
So definitely this is a topic that is very, very broad and very, very deep as well, and definitely touches upon a lot of sensitive and long-standing dynamics that you might be encountering. This is really just like a 10-minute podcast. And yeah, if you do need more in-depth, more sustained help, I do encourage you to reach out to a professional in order to receive that help.
For any of our listeners out there who might have any further questions, feel free to just drop your comments or thoughts into the comment section down below. And yeah, just like get a conversation going.
Thank you so much, Yee Ning, for your time, and I'll see you in the next episode.